Welcome back to Talking X's and O's with Alex and Tyler. We have a great week of football coming up. Obviously, last week we didn't do our podcast like usual just because, Thanksgiving and finals are coming up and all that stuff. But, you know, great game of football played last week for a lot of different teams. Obviously, the three games played on Thursday night for Thanksgiving had some huge excitement for them. But, going into last week, there's a lot of contention for playoff spots. This week's the same thing. Players, teams, and stuff like that are always trying to fight for a good position to head into the final stretch of the NFL season. Obviously, one of the bigger games with like the Raiders, the Lions, the Cardinals, all those big games. So let's jump straight into some of the close games we had last week with the Thanksgiving games around the corner from last week. So start off with the Thanksgiving games for Thursday night was the Bears and Lions score of 23-20, which, had a lot of weird things happening towards the end of the game. And I know, Alex, you probably watched the game and you probably saw the same thing that I did with this whole Bears and Lions matchup. I mean, first off, the Bears started off horrible in the first half, and they ended up coming back with a score of 23-20, like I mentioned, and to lose the game the way they did with, basically 30 seconds being ran off the clock at the very end of the game, which in terms got their head coach fired, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But how did you feel about that game being played on Thursday morning?
Yeah, it was really an interesting game just because, obviously the Lions are doing really well. 11-1, that's their record this season. And then when you look at the Bears, they're not doing so great. They're 4-8 currently. And, obviously they lost that game in just the final seconds of it after Matt Eberflus did not call a timeout. Poor clock management right there. But, it was really interesting to see such a close game between these two teams just because obviously the Lions have been easily making their way throughout the season. And then when you look at the Bears, obviously they've had a lot of struggles. So, it was really interesting and kind of concerning on the Lions' part, just because, to me, I really thought that maybe the Lions would run away with this one, but obviously that was not the case. So it was really interesting to see, but, I think it's going to be interesting to see, how the Bears navigate throughout the rest of the season. And, obviously how the Lions are going to play when they go against the Green Bay Packers, which will be taking place on Thursday Night Football.
Yeah, and it's things like this. I mean, we always talk about, big divisional games and how things are gonna turn out. I think with how the Bears have been performing so far, I mean, obviously talk about, you know, Shane Waldron being fired from the Bears and just how much that whole offense has evolved since him being fired. I mean, Caleb Williams has been playing great. Offense has been playing great. Defense, they've been a top 10 defense in, you know, scoring and passing offense. Run defense is a little bit of a different story, but they've been playing great football, and, you bring up the Lions with the 11-1 record. I mean, they have probably one of the toughest divisions in the NFL so far. You mentioned, Packers, you mentioned the Vikings. Both those teams could very easily make the playoffs this year. And, Vikings, I think, are a couple of games away from actually securing a wild card spot. Packers not too far behind, but those are, games that will essentially come down to who's going to be the better team in those divisions. And it's very likely we could see the Lions face a divisional rival in the playoffs and see how things go forward from there. But on the Bear side, I mean, this point, you're already so far down that you might as well start looking into next year with the draft, next year with rebuilding and stuff like that. I mean, you're at the point right now where you're kind of trying to find an identity. And the reason I say that is because, like I mentioned, you just fired Shane Waldron 4 weeks ago. You just now fired your head coach, Matt Eberflus, which I think was a great thing for the Bears to do. But at this point in time, I mean, it's not going to help out much because you're already too far gone in the playoffs. But speaking of Eberflus, he became the first head coach in the Bears history to have been fired during the season in its 104 years of operation, which I think is, a little insane just because you think of some of the other head coaches that the Bears have had, and for him to be the first one to have been fired during the season is absolutely shocking. I mean, obviously, with the game last week against the Lions, I mean, like you mentioned, the 30-second rundown from the clock, I mean, that was a huge reason as to why he got fired, plus, the heartbreaking upsets or the heartbreaking losses, I should say, from the Packers, the Vikings, and the Lions in 3 consecutive weeks with a blocked field goal, going into overtime, and then losing the way you did last Thursday with the 30-second runoff. I mean, I shouldn't say it's all on Eberflus because as a quarterback with Caleb Williams, you have to hurry up and snap the ball with, as much time as you can to get into field goal range. But at a certain time, you also have to take over for a rookie quarterback and tell him like, "Hey, like, listen, we have time. This is what you're gonna do. Do this. Don't just let them burn the entire clock and lose the game like you did like that." But speaking of that, you go look at his on the road record. He has not won a single Sunday road game in his head coaching career, and I think, looking at that statistic alone could be a huge red flag because that basically says that you're not good enough to be fighting people on the road, and for the road game records, I think they've only won 3 games that weren't on Sunday that were on the road, but still, like, that's not a record you want to see as a head coach. Obviously, Lions are probably gonna be, in the playoffs, or they guarantee are gonna be in the playoffs, but Super Bowl, I mean, that's just a question on how healthy the team stays, and, it's always about which team gets hot at the right moment, and we saw the Vikings start up super hot, and now they're kind of, cooling off a little bit, but who's to say, they could jump right back into this thing and make it a game for the Lions. But jumping into the first Black Friday game with the Raiders and the Chiefs, score of 17-19, and this game, I think, was really close from start to finish. I mean, you have Aiden O'Connell who came in for the injured, Gardner Minshew, who unfortunately suffered a broken collarbone 2 weeks ago, and you have him come in, and you go up against the number 1 team in the AFC, and for them to lose the way they did as well with a botched fumble, from field goal range to beat the Chiefs, I think was a little unfortunate, but there's always controversy with how games end, and especially this game. I mean, to lose the way they did with the botched fumble, a ref coming in signaling false start, I mean, it really was one of those games I think a lot of people tuned into that had Amazon Prime, that looked at that game and was like, "The Raiders should have won that game," and I honestly agree. I mean, the Chiefs, like I said, they really have not been that great of a team that their record shows, and there was a statistic that I saw with the Chiefs this year with their 1-11 record compared to the Steelers back in 2020 when they were 1-11, and it makes the Steelers from that year look like they were going to be Super Bowl champions with, how many points they put up, how their defense was playing, and literally everything from top to bottom. The Chiefs just have not been playing good. I think they have been playing lucky a lot of these games, and I know you could probably attest to the same thing, Alex, with what you've been seeing with the Chiefs so far.
Yeah, this game was concerning as well. Obviously the Chiefs 11-1, same record as the Lions. I think that they, you know, should have won this game with a lot more points on the board. But, when you look at division games, and this is a heated rivalry, the Raiders Chiefs, it's a heated rivalry. And it really just puts into question, um, the way that both of these teams play when they play against each other. And honestly, I don't think that it really puts an impression on if the team is good or not. But I think that, whenever two teams like this come together and play against each other, it's really going to be a competitive game. And you can never project who is going to win because anybody can win. And anybody can win any game, but especially the division games. And, obviously, earlier on in the year, we saw the Raiders and Chiefs face off against each other, and this one was in Las Vegas, a game that I was actually at. And, it was a close game. It was a very close game, the same as this week. And, it was just really interesting. It's interesting to see division games that take place just because of, how competitive the players are and how much they want to win, and especially in those games. So I really do think that, this was a little bit concerning on the Chiefs side. Obviously, the Raiders have been eliminated from playoff contention, so really not much to say about the Raiders, but the Chiefs will be facing off against the Chargers this upcoming week, and I think it's going to be a interesting matchup. I think that the Chiefs obviously have what it takes to win. And one thing about the Chiefs is that it's hard to go against Patrick Mahomes. It's hard to say that the Chiefs are not going to win. It's hard to not believe in them. And the Chiefs, I feel like, are always a team that you have to believe in with Mahomes in the circle.
Yeah, and you bring up Mahomes with one of those players that you can always rely on. But looking at his stats, I mean, he really has not been a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. I mean, we look at his record, you know, 2,979 yards passing, 19 touchdowns, 11 interceptions with a quarterback rating of 64.4. I mean, those aren't stats you see from Patrick Mahomes at all, should I say. I mean, even his first year when he started off back in 2018, I mean, he never had those stats ever. And for him to be, you know, up there in interceptions with, being able to throw the ball around and, obviously, I mean, the the Chiefs wide receiver core isn't the greatest, but it's still a lot better than other teams. I mean, you still have Xavier Worthy, who's been pumping production. You have Levante Adams, who's been a really reliable receiver for that group. You have Travis Kelce, who's always been Mahomes' favorite target. And, you add Pacheco, who just came back from IR. You add Kareem Hunt, who's been playing a great fill-in role for the running back spot. And there's just a lot of things that are going to help out with, you know, Patrick Mahomes and being able to have that championship roster. I mean, just recently we just got reports that DJ Humphries was signed to the Chiefs, so it'll help booster that offensive line that the Chiefs have, but it all comes down to how is he going to play against all these teams coming up. And you look at the team's uh schedule for the rest of the season. They have some, I shouldn't say easy competition. They have some pretty tough matchups. I mean, we have this week's game against the Chargers, we have the Browns, we have the Texans, we have the Steelers on Christmas, then we have the Broncos to end off the season. And the Chiefs could very easily fall out of the number 1 spot in the AFC. And I think, like I said earlier, a lot of these teams are trying to play for positions in the playoffs, positions for seeding, whatever the case may be. The Chiefs could very well fall to a number 3 spot in the AFC depending on these next 5 games. So, that's definitely something to, look forward to, with the Chiefs going into this game against another divisional rival. Moving on from that, we have another divisional game from last week with the Texans and Jaguars. This game's always close for some reason, but the Texans were able to pull off a win, or the Jaguars were able to pull off a win against the Texans. Um, it really, I mean, it's crazy how, a lot of these teams, they come together and they always seem to want to prove something. I mean, obviously, the Texans with their team and, starting off with like Super Bowl contenders, it really has just diminished in front of their whole team with injuries, with, regressions, with whatever the case may be. I mean, obviously, CJ Stroud hasn't been playing super good. Uh, Al Shire just got suspended 3 games. I mean, it's been all over the place. And for the Texans to barely sneak out a win against the Jaguars for, I believe, the second time. Yeah, the second time because they barely beat them 24-20 last game they played against each other. I mean, it's kind of a concern with how, they're in the playoff just because their division sucks, but it also gives, other teams like the Colts a chance to take the division and, go a little bit farther in the playoff. But I mean, the Texans, they have to get something together if they want to progress further in the playoffs as, like, a lot of people hope they would. I mean, CJ Stroud looked to be, MVP of the future, and now he's looking like he just started playing football for as a rookie this year, and, he's making rookie mistakes. And, granted, it could be a sophomore slump, but playing against teams that have literally the number 1 spot in the NFL for the next year's draft is a little bit of a concern going into the playoff scenario.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. And obviously, the Texans Jags game was a very, competitive game. The final score 23-20, as you mentioned. And, it's really just going to be interesting to see how both of these teams, play the rest of the season. Obviously, the Texans came into the season, playing really well, but it seems like they've just, kind of fallen apart lately. They're not playing as well. They're not playing at the level that they can be playing out. And then, when you look at the Jags, obviously now without Trevor Lawrence, that is going to be interesting because, obviously Trevor Lawrence has done some great things with the Jags in the past. However, they're still 2-10 right now. They are not that great. And now they will be with a backup quarterback after Trevor Lawrence was put on the IR. He was put on the IR because of a hit by Aziz Al-Shaair. Al-Shaair was suspended for 3 games after the illegal hit to Trevor Lawrence, and he was ejected from the game. And then, he appealed suspension, but his case was upheld by a former teammate of Al-Shaair's. The person who upheld the suspension was Ramon Foster, a former offensive lineman who is now an NFL appeals officer. He opted to uphold Al-Shaair's suspension. So Al-Shaair will be eligible to return to the Texans' active roster following the team's Week 17 game against the Baltimore Ravens. So the earliest return will be on January 5th when the team faces off against the Tennessee Titans. And it was really interesting because Al-Shaair followed up with an apology, and then, he took to social media by saying, "If you want me to be your villain, I will be your villain. See you soon." So I found that really interesting. And I do think it was good that they, sent a clear message to the NFL players, and more specifically, the defensive players in the NFL, really just showing them that they will not tolerate hits like this and that it can really damage somebody. And I think that, by suspending him and especially seeing a former teammate that used to play with him upholding the suspension was a great message to the rest of the NFL players.
Yeah, and, we talk about the suspension, and it really comes as a surprise, especially with, how I shouldn't say influential, but with how much of an impact, the NFL has been trying to stay away from concussions and all that situation. And for, Al Shahir to continue to, bring in situations where it's a health for players like we just saw last Sunday against the Jaguars. I mean, who's to say if that quarterback happened to be Tua, and that was, another one of his big concussions that he has for his career? I mean, that could potentially be a season ender for him. I mean, you never know. And for those type of situations, I mean, there is a big, you know, awareness around not being able to hit quarterbacks sliding down like that. And, we have seen instances where, quarterbacks slide down and players are already in motion, but they have to pull up it somehow. I don't think Al-Shaair really pulled up. I think he kind of still went head first into that situation. I do think, even with the appeal, I don't think he was gonna get appealed for, a game suspension, which it's interesting now because there was a contract clause in, when he signed with the Texans about being suspended that could cost him a ton of money, and it just so happened that it was a 3-game suspension where that could cost him, a lot of money for his contract in the future. But for situations like this, especially, as severe as, concussions are in the NFL. I mean, that's something you can't be taken lightly. And for him to go on Instagram and social media and be like, "I'm your biggest villain" and stuff like that, it's not really showing a great showcase for incoming players to see that and be like, this is how we have to play and whatever. But for him to, come out and apologize, I think it's more of a PR move, I should say, just because, as a player, you don't want to get hit with, you don't want to get hit with, face of the public or whatever. You don't want to look as bad. But then for him to immediately come out and say all the stuff that he did, I mean, it's really just not a good look for the Texans organization, especially with Alshire. But moving on, the Cardinals and Viking game. This was actually a very close game that not many people thought it was going to be a close game. Cardinals actually started off strong against the Vikings, going up 19-6 in the third quarter, and Sam Darnold putting up the biggest comeback win over his career, beat the Cardinals 22-23, uh, giving them more of a secure spot for the playoffs. Cardinals falling back a little bit behind in the playoffs. Now the number 2 seed in the NFC West behind the Seattle Seahawks, who also had the biggest blowout win against Aaron Rodgers, as Aaron Rodgers and the Jets now fall to, I believe, 3-9, and Aaron Rodgers now suffering the biggest blown blown loss of his career, being up 23 or 24-9 or 24-6 at halftime. So a lot of bad luck for the Cardinals. Unfortunate coaching mistakes from the Cardinals. But watching this game, I mean, the Cardinals defense shockingly looked like the better part of the Cardinals team. And, going into the season, I think you and I both talked about, the defensive line, the inexperience in the defense with the secondary, the pass rush, whatever the case may have been for the Cardinals. But they really have changed how the defense is played. I mean, the Cardinals defense is definitely underrated aspect in the NFL, and the way they've been playing against, big teams is definitely shocking, especially when you have players like Justin Jefferson, especially when you have players like Aaron Jones, and for them to be able to keep them in check for majority of the game, I mean, it really has been something spectacular to see. And, obviously the Cardinals offense, it's just a little bit, I shouldn't say out of sync, but I think there's some miscues that caused them to lose this game. Obviously, the penalties was a big issue going into this game for the Cardinals, who I think were the least penalized team in the league, and for them to commit all these penalties and essentially lose the game, I think that was a big issue. I think the Cardinals went too conservative too early in the game, and that also cost them the game. But it's just a matter of time before the Cardinals get something clicking and, it's gonna be a dangerous game. If the Cardinals do make the playoffs, cool. I don't know if they're necessarily going to make the playoffs. This week against Seattle is gonna be one of the big implementing factors on which team makes the playoffs going forward into the season. Um, but for right now, I mean, the Cardinals have really defined all odds that a lot of people had at the beginning of the season. I mean, you looked at FanDuel, you look at like betting props and stuff like that. The Cardinals were projected to win 8 games this season to go over or under. I mean, for them to sit at 6-6 going into the next 5 games with, the Panthers, the Patriots, the Rams, the 49ers, and then this game against the Seahawks. I mean, they're sitting at really good competition with, having a close playoff spot, but it really just comes down to, and like I said earlier with the Vikings, I mean, they're sitting pretty at a 10-2 record, so there's really gonna be, a lot of things going forward from there. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's anything interesting that you saw about the game. I mean, that's just my personal opinion with how the game looked when I watched it. Trey McBride, I think I've mentioned this before, is gonna be one of the future tight ends in the NFL. He kind of reminds me more of like uh Travis Kelce role, like I mentioned earlier. But it's definitely something that we'll hopefully see later on down the season.
Yeah, this game was really interesting because obviously the Cardinals had a huge lead over the Vikings, and then, it just seemed like they let off the gas pedal. So, you know, it's going to be interesting to see as they, host the Seahawks here in Arizona. I honestly do think that the Cardinals will be able to pull this one off just because, the Seahawks won the last game. They've played each other this season, and I think a lot of notes were taken during the last game in Seattle. So, obviously the Cardinals are a good team. Their defense has been performing outstandingly, as you just mentioned. And, it's really going to be interesting to see how the Cardinals perform for the rest of their season. And you mentioned that you aren't sure if they'll make the playoffs. I do think they will, just because they have that motivation. Kyler Murray has been performing at a way better rate than he has in the past. So, I do think they have what it takes. I do think that this is a critical game as we head into week 14. So it's going to be interesting to see if they can pull it off against the Seahawks.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about an in-depth layout later in this podcast, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to be one of those more watched games going into this week just because of how much is at stake for those two teams. But moving forward, the Colts and Patriots game, that was one game that I did not expect to be extremely close. I honestly thought the Patriots were gonna go in and, show the Colts, "Hey, like, we're not messing around. We may not be, uh, super developed, but we definitely have potential going on down the road." And they did. Um, but when you have Anthony Richardson, who I should say has been playing a lot better since being benched for Joe Flacco, um, he's been having a great game, goes out, throws a late game tying touchdown, goes and runs for a 2-point conversion and essentially wins the game, going keeping their playoff hopes alive. One thing that I found really, really interesting was how close the Patriots kicker Joey Sly was making a 68-yard field goal. I mean, it was literally maybe half a foot off from making NFL history and winning a game from them. But with how the Colts been playing with Jonathan Taylor, Joe Flat or not Joe Flat, Anthony Richardson, who has been playing a lot better since he's been benched. The emergence of Josh Downs has been playing great. Um, Michael Pittman, who's been playing, up to speed. Alec Pierce, who's been making some great deep plays. But it really is going to come down to whether the Texans fall and the Colts keep rising, or if there's a chance that the Colts could make a fighting spot with other wild card teams in the AFC. Duking it out for that final spot. But we definitely have seen improvements. We've definitely seen some gutsy calls from the head coach. I mean, it looks really good for the Colts. One thing that I did find interesting was someone had brought up the point about the Colts, or not the Colts specifically, but teams talking about quarterbacks and how they'd rather see the quarterback throw the ball away rather than taking the sack. And they mentioned Anthony Richardson with his throwing ability and how he avoids pressure and then ends up tossing the ball away if he doesn't see anything open as, pressure is collapsing on him. And I went back and looked at some of, his replay, some of his highlights of him throwing the ball away. He actually does a really good job at avoiding sacks and, putting his team behind the line of scrimmage. And it's interesting because we talk about, oh, his completion percentage sucks. It's all like a 41%, like an all-time low in the NFL or something like that. But you look at the stats or you look at the tape, he is only throwing the ball away whenever he feels the pressure. And, maybe there's some, overthrown balls, some slightly underthrown balls. Maybe the receivers can't catch on the ball. But for him to be able to make those plays and be aware of when to toss the ball away, I mean, that's some elite quarterback skills that you don't see from even like Hall of Fame quarterbacks. I think him being able to develop a mindset saying like, okay, I can get something to work, or I can't get something to work. I just need to get the ball tossed away. If the Colts have a great quarterback for the future, they just need to build around him. And I think right now they're in a phase where it's kind of similar to the Cardinals, where they can be good enough, but there's chances that they have the potential to go far in future years if they don't make it this year. So obviously, a great win for the Colts against the Patriots. I don't know if you have anything to add on for this game, Alex, but I mean, the Colts, when they need to keep their playoff hopes alive, they've done a great job at doing so.
Yeah, no, I think you kind of explained it all. That was great. This game was really interesting, obviously, with it ending 25-24 and then the Colts getting the dub. I honestly did think that maybe the Patriots would be able to pull off the win. Obviously, that was not the case. So the Colts went in there and did their job. And, throughout the season, the Colts have not done that well, except, it seems like they're picking things up a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see what they do in the future and, what their run will be like. But, it was a great game to see. And I think that both teams really gave it their all. So that will do it for week 13's, scary scores. And now we're going to head into week 14. I'll let you start that off.
So to start off with the Thursday night game, heavy matchup between the Green Bay Packers and the Detroit Lions. I mean, last time we saw these two teams play, the Lions kind of, I shouldn't say killed them, but they kind of ran away with the game against the Packers. Um, is that going to happen this game? Probably not. Like I said, the NFC North is a very, very competitive division, or I shouldn't say division. Yeah, no, division for football. Uh, Obviously, you have the Packers who are currently in the playoffs, the Vikings who are a couple of games away from clinching a wild card spot, the Lions who I think have now clinched a wild card spot if they keep losing games. But right now they look to be division titles for the second time in the row. Um, this game is going to be a hard fought game, high scoring game potentially. Um, Lions defense has been playing great. They've sustained some injuries. We saw a lot of injuries, especially Thanksgiving last week against the Bears. Uh, Packers have been heating up slowly. So it's a matter of time to see what happens going on as the weeks continue. Will we see a new division title this year in the NFC North with the Vikings? Will we see the Packers take over against the Vikings? Will the Lions stay division titles for a second time in a row? Who knows? I mean, it's definitely worth something to see what happens. The Packers, they've been playing great. Jordan Love, he's been throwing the ball around, maybe a little too much, leads the league right now in interceptions. But you gotta do what you gotta do, and for this game specifically, there's not a lot of playoff potential because both the teams are already, in the playoffs and they have some big leads. I mean, the Packers, there's more on the line because, if you lose a couple more games, you might be out of the playoffs. The Lions, if you lose, you might lose the division title. But for both these teams, I mean, for as well as they've been playing, I mean, this game could really go either way. And we look back at last week or last time these teams had played. The Lions, I mean, obviously beat the Packers, I think, by 10 points. But for them to come in this game after barely beating the Bears last week, I mean, should we see an upset? Absolutely. I truly think the Packers will win this week against the Lions. And I think, one being the Lions just with all the injuries and, all the injuries that happened, especially last week against the Bears, I think it's going to be one of those games where they kind of fall apart and we kind of see them regroup next week. Um, could we see something? Maybe. I mean, we've seen Dan Campbell make some crazy gutsy calls. We've seen Jared Goff throw the ball extremely well this season. We've seen the two punch with Sonic and Knuckles with Jameer Gibbs and David Montgomery. We've seen Amon-Ra St. Brown make some pretty great catches. Same thing could be said for Josh Jacobs and his wide receiver core with Wicks and Watson and Kraft and all of them. But it's going to be a high scoring game. It's going to be a dogfight. I do think the Packers are going to upset the Lions this week.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with you on that. I do think that the Packers are going to upset the Lions. And to hear me go against the Lions is a rare thing cuz I really think that the Lions are, they're standing on top in the league this year and they're a great team, but I don't think they will be tonight. You mentioned a high-scoring game and, honestly, I'm feeling risky. So, I think the Packers might be able to run away with this one. It's going to be interesting. I do think that their defense will play a key role in this game. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown, which is, one of the Lions' top receivers, if not their top receiver, will be facing some heavy coverage tonight. One thing that the Packers will need to contain in order to get the dub tonight will be, stopping Jordan Montgomery, stopping David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. Obviously those are some huge key factors for the Lions, and they just when they have the ball in their hands, it can be a scary thing. So, I do think that the Packers will be able to, win this one tonight, but it will be an interesting game. And, I say it's going to be high scoring, but I would not be surprised if it was, on the lower scoring side either. So, regardless, I do think that, this will be a very interesting game.
Yeah, and especially like I mentioned with, how much is on the line for both of these teams, it could be, you know, a game that goes either way. And I keep mentioning this, but just we always see it each year with the Packers and the Lions and how close all those games should be. And they have every right to. I mean, they play very competitive ball. We've seen, Dan Campbell make some gutsy calls. Would there be a couple gutsy calls this week against the Packers? Absolutely. And I do feel, the Packers are gonna win this game. Is there a chance the Lions could win? Absolutely. I mean, it's just the way the division is played, but that's gonna end the Thursday night football game tonight. Moving into the early games of Sunday, we start off with another divisional rival with the Jets and the Dolphins. Now, the Jets, they're just all over the place. We've seen the head coach get fired. We've seen the general manager get fired. We've seen conversations about Aaron Rodgers not coming back for the Jets next year. We've seen conversations about him retiring. We've seen conversations about him being benched. Literally everything that has gone wrong for the Jets has gone wrong. And there's something that I saw earlier this week that said not even the biggest skeptics for the Jets thought they were going to be this bad. And I think wholeheartedly that is 100% true. I don't think you could talk to a single Jets hater and think that they were gonna be one of the worst teams in football this year with the talent that they had. Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, Hassan Reddick, who has been kind of a bust since coming back from, the holdout, Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, the whole defense that's on the Jets with Quincy Williams, KJ Mosley, uh, Quentin Williams, Sauce Gardner. I mean, they have a stacked team and they just cannot get it together. On the other hand, you have the Dolphins with Tua, with Tyreek Hill, Devon Achane, all those key players with, Jalen Ramsey and Devon Holland, and just how both these teams have been playing so far. It hasn't been great. Obviously, Tua was out for that period with a concussion. Him coming back, they've been decent. I shouldn't say they've been playing great, but they have been making strides at being able to come back to fight for a playoff spot. The Jets currently sit right now at a 3-9 record. Dolphins sit at a 5-7 record. Jets, I think, pretty much are going to be eliminated this week from the playoffs. There's no doubt. I mean, for the Dolphins, there's a lot more on the line. There's a chance you could make the playoffs. Do I think either of these teams are going to make the playoffs? No. The Jets are, too far gone. There's nothing, that's gonna save this season from getting the hellfire that it's been so far. Dolphins, I mean, you've been hit with injury after injury. I think it's an unfortunate season. Do I think all is lost? No, but there's not really much to gain to keep winning these games. And especially with how competitive the AFC has been so far this season, there's a chance that, they might make the playoffs if a couple teams lose here and there, but for them sitting at a under 500 record, it's gonna be a hard-fought battle to get back into the wild card spot. But talking about this game, I think the Dolphins are going to beat the Jets. I think they're just a much better team all around, offensively and defensively. I think they have more kept together with Mike McDaniels, being able to coach the team as well as he has with the injuries that he's faced and all the adversary that he's gone through. The Jets, on the other hand, it's just what went wrong and how you try to recover from that. It just has not been great. We probably have seen Aaron Rodgers play, his last season in the NFL. And if we haven't, I don't think he's gonna get picked up by a team next year. If he does, it's gonna be more of a, you know, fill-in spot for a team that, has a rookie they wanna build off on. But I think we have seen Aaron Rodgers play his last season. I don't know why he came back last year after tearing his AC or his Achilles, but it is what it is. Dolphins, like I said, everything's starting to build back for them. They're starting to, heat up a little bit, but I think it's too late. But I do think the Dolphins are going to win this game against the Jets.
Yeah, I am gonna second that. I do think that, the Dolphins will be able to take down the Jets, and you really just hit the nail spot on. So, I agree with you on everything that you said about the Jets. Everything has gone wrong. And I liked what you said about finding the biggest Jets hater. And, even they wouldn't think that the Jets would have performed the way they performed this season. So, really just a unimaginable thing for the Jets this season. Heading into the season, I think a lot of people really thought that, the Jets had a good chance of, making the playoffs and doing what they have not done in a long time, which is go to a Super Bowl. And, obviously, that will not be the case right now. 3-9, about to be 3-10 when they play against the Dolphins. So it's going to be interesting, and it's interesting for the Dolphins as well, with the roster that they have. But I like that you mentioned the injuries that they've faced, because I really do think that that has played into the outcome of their season as well. So just two unpredictable teams. I think this one will go to the Dolphins, but it's really just it's hard to predict these teams.
Yeah, and with especially with just how much hype the Jets had over the last two seasons, it's been kind of sad to watch Jets fans, watch this team play worse than they did last year with Zach Wilson as their quarterback. And I'm not saying, worse record wise, I'm saying worse playing wise. The Jets last year at this point had 5 games that they won. They scored more points. They've had more defensive, stats where regarding interceptions, tackle for loss, whatever the case may be. How is this team, not playing better with Aaron Rodgers back? And I think I don't wanna be a Aaron Rodgers, hater, but I do feel like Aaron Rodgers kinda tried to take control of the Jets, and it kind of just backfired in his face. And, I we look at Tom Brady and how he played with the Buccaneers a couple years ago. I think he was able to pull it off because you look at, how the team was formulated with Mike Evans, with how the defense was, and you kind of just try to build off of that. I mean, granted, you still had Bruce Arians, who I think is a lot better head coach than, you know, uh, Robert Saleh was, but I think there was a lot more beyond the scenes with Tom Brady than we saw with the Jets and their whole organization. I think, Tom Brady did try to take control of the organization, but he was limited on what he could and couldn't do. I think the Jets kind of gave everything to Rodgers and were like, do what you want. That's why we still see Nathaniel Hackett on the team, who should have been one of the first coaches to have been fired on that team. But moving on, the next game we have is the Falcons and Vikings game, and this game should not be close. Kirk Cousins has not been playing well at all with, you know, how the high defensive teams and, the Vikings and with how the Vikings defense has been playing. I mean, it's going to be a hard fought game going into this game. And I know you had something to add, Alex, regarding the Jets and Dolphins game, so I'll let you take over that real quick if you want.
Yeah, you talked about Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady and his last season, but it's really unfortunate to see if this is it for Aaron Rodgers. It's unfortunate to see him go out this way. Obviously he will be a Hall of Famer. So just really interesting to see him, just keep on playing and play for the Jets and then go out like this. So, it makes you question if this is really it for Aaron Rodgers or if he wants to have a redemption season.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny that, we bring up the Falcons and Vikings game next because there's been a lot of talk with, Rodgers potentially going to the Minnesota Vikings next year now that, JJ McCarthy had that second surgery in his leg. Um, it kind of like a romantic story with Brett Favre, going from Packers to the Jets and then ending his career off with the Vikings. Could we see the same thing with Aaron Rodgers? I personally don't think so, with especially, Daniel Jones being signed to the team. I mean, they might look at him and say, "Hey, he's a great second option to have when JJ McCarthy does come back." Maybe they look at it and go, maybe we just sign Aaron Rodgers to a low veteran contract or whatever the case may be. But, moving on, we talked a little bit about the Vikings defense, Falcons and Kirk Cousins and how they've been progressing. Cousins, I think, is one of the next quarterbacks that's going to retire soon. And we look at his play. Obviously, he also had an Achilles tear last year. He looked great to start the season off. He's been kind of on a slump, throwing 8 interceptions in the last 3 games, I believe, 4 of them being in the last game against the Chargers. I don't see much happening in this game against the Vikings. The Vikings have one of the best defenses in the league with the pass rush, run stopping, corners. I mean, they have looked like a fierce team defensively on any team that they've faced so far. I think the only team that has, given them a little bit of trouble has been the Lions and Packers. And I'm not saying like those teams aren't bad, but those are definitely good teams you wanna have those struggles against. But the Vikings, I mean, they've been just hitting the nail on everything that they need going defensively. They're a bend, not break defense, shall I say. And we've seen this time and time again. And, you know, maybe we see something happening where, the Falcons do pull off an upset, but I just can't see it. I mean, Bijan, he's been stepping up his production. Uh, Drake London has been a true number one receiver for Kirk Cousins. But with how Kirk Cousins has been playing, maybe there's a chance, you see Michael Penix make his first NFL start for the Atlanta Falcons. And whatever the case may be, I mean, we saw him get pulled into the game last week and he played mediocre. I mean, obviously, as a rookie to get thrown in a game like that, it's not hard to, make a lot of mistakes like that. But maybe there's a chance that we see more of a Penix in the future if Cousins still continues to struggle. But for this game, I'm gonna have to give it to the Vikings. Um, I do think their defense is gonna stop the Falcons from scoring a lot. I do think, the Falcons offense just isn't gonna be able to do much against that defense and vice versa. I think the Falcons defense just isn't gonna stop, Justin Jefferson, Aaron Jones, Sam Darnold, and how they've been performing.
Yeah, I'm also going to choose the Vikings for this matchup. I think that the Falcons really started off this season strong, but as time progressed, they just kind of, lost that fire in them. And so, I do think that the Vikings will win this one. I think that, it will be a little closer than people think it will be. Except, everything really just fell apart on the Falcons side. Obviously, coming into the season, Kirk Cousins, he showed that he could get the job done, but as I mentioned, over time, really they just fell apart. On the Viking side, that's not the case. Obviously, Sam Darnold just really trying to prove to people that, you can count on him as a starter and that he is good enough to be a starter. And I like that you mentioned that the two losses from the Vikings, they were tough games. So, I do think that the Vikings are a good team. I think that, they really have what it takes. I don't know if I would view them as a Super Bowl contender, but I think that they possibly could make their way into the Super Bowl somehow. Um, but I'm gonna go with the Vikings on this one. I think that they'll be able to get this done. Plus, it's gonna be at home, so we know how that goes in their stadium.
Yeah, and just looking at, how the Vikings have performed so far, I mean, I think a lot of people kind of looked at them as a rebuilding phrase, and for them to have, come out and continue to improve each week and play tougher competition each week, it's definitely shocking to see what could become in the future. But moving on, another game, and I say a game just because I don't think many people are gonna be watching this game, is the Saints and the Giants. Now, the Saints have been kind of hot recently with, the firing of Dennis Allen, and the Giants are the Giants. They, just fired they just cut Daniel Jones, after the humiliating week that they had with him, from being from bench to 3rd string to 4th string to not even being on the team to, playing positions that he shouldn't even be playing. It's kind of sad to watch this Giants team just completely fall apart, and I think a lot of it revolves around Saquon Barkley. I think the team choosing to sign Daniel Jones over Saquon Barkley for a future contract was the first mistake that the team made, and I do think this team is going to, regret that decision for quite some time. I mean, we look at Saquon Barkley, who in my choice should be the MVP of this NFL season. Granted, it would suck to see, Josh Allen get robbed of another, MVP because of Saquon Barkley playing, historic career, rushing, being able to do what he has been doing, creating a reverse hurdle, whatever the case may be. But for the Giants to look at Saquon Barkley and say, "Hey, we're gonna re-sign Daniel Jones," I think, was the start of this whole thing unraveling. Do I think Daniel Jones is a terrible quarterback? No. Do I think, he kind of, was screwed out of, the Giants organization? Kind of, but he did have a lot of mistake after coming back from that ACL tear he had last season. And, it might just be rust, it might just be Daniel Jones making, too many reads and just getting, too anxious in the pocket, whatever the case may be. I do think Daniel Jones is a good quarterback. I know I'm probably one of the few people to say that, but for him to get the disrespect that the Giants had last week and 2 weeks from now, it's kind of upsetting to see. But, they're rolling with Drew Lock because Danny DeVito was out with another arm injury. Derek Carr, is going up against a team with a very heavily injured team. Obviously, his number 1 and number 2 receivers are both on injured reserve. He just lost Taysom Hill, who had torn his ACL last game, so he'll be out for the season. His career also might be over with him being 35 years old. We might have seen Taysom Hill play his last lap. Who knows? He's a strong competitive fighter. Maybe we'll see him back next year. But yeah, it's definitely one of those games that you're not gonna miss much if you miss the game. Both these teams, I would say, are both fighting for draft positioning. Giants currently have, I think, the number 3 spot in the NFL draft upcoming. So if they do stay there, I'm almost certain they're probably gonna look for a quarterback, especially now with the emergence of Tyrone Tracy Jr. taking over as the number 1 running back. It's just unfortunate that, the whole Saquon Barkley thing, Daniel Jones thing happened. But I do think the Saints are gonna win this game. Giants, defense has been playing great, but or I should say the Giants pass rushing has been playing great. Defense as a whole, they haven't had an interception, I think 14 weeks or something like that. Or no, not 14 weeks, 10 weeks. Obviously that's an NFL record, because they're the only team that has one interception. Uh Offense hasn't been getting anything going. They're just a young team, so I'm gonna give the win to the Saints.
Yeah, I also am gonna go with the Saints on this one. Um, but I think that this will be a close game. I wouldn't be surprised if the Giants were able to win this one, but I think with Derek Carr and his experience behind him, I think that that will be an advantage for the Saints. Um, the Giants do have some good players. You mentioned Tyrone Tracy Jr., and then you have, Malik Neighbors, who was drafted. And you mentioned how the Giants will be looking for a quarterback in their next draft. I do agree with that statement just because, they have a good running back, they have a good receiver. They are, throwing around some quarterbacks to just try and find somebody who will get them through the rest of the season. Obviously, they don't really have much of a season left. They're 2-10. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the draft and who they decide to go with. And then on the Saints side, obviously they started the season off very, very strong, and then they just kind of declined as the season went on. So this, I agree, won't be a highly watched game, but I think it will be interesting. I think it will be interesting for, I hate to say it, but two of the worst teams in the league. Um, but, I think both teams are really just trying to find some answers and find what they need to fix for next season. And I think going on the rest of this season, really that's their main focus. And, I don't even want to say the rest of the season because I think this started a few weeks back. They were just zoning in on what they need to work on and what they need to fix for next season. So it will be interesting to see how these teams change for next season and what they decide to do.
Yeah, and it's really just a matter of looking for the future. I mean, the Giants secured probably their franchise wide receiver for the next 5 years, with Malik Neighbors, who has been, a top targeted receiver in the NFL. He just needs to work on, catching the ball a little bit better. He's had some pretty big drops in some games, but I think he'll get it better as his career progresses. Um, Same thing with Tracy Jr. I think he's going to be one of the better backs in the NFL, especially with how he's been playing with the Giants' offensive line so far. I mean, it's definitely something to look forward to. I do think the Giants might sign maybe a veteran quarterback just to have a rookie quarterback, develop under center, but we'll see what the future holds. But talking about Saquon Barkley, the Eagles will play the Panthers at Philadelphia, and that's, another huge game for the Eagles. I mean, they just came back from beating a top AFC team with the Baltimore Ravens. There's going to be a lot of, things going on there. Obviously, it might not be a heavy watched game just because the Panthers haven't been playing, or their record hasn't been spectacular, but their record has shown that they do have, a high draft pick, and with the way the team has been playing so far with, Bryce Young and Allen and Adam Thielen and Xavier Legette and the emergence of Chuba Hubbard and Jonathan Brooks. I mean, the team definitely could be playing for pride. Granted, they might not beat the Eagles. I mean, the Eagles are a top team in the NFL. I think right now they're actually one of the top teams to win the Super Bowl this year with the Bills, I believe, or another team, or though the Lions, that's who it was. But I mean, for them to come out and, play against this very tough Eagles team that has, Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley, uh, AJ Brown, the defense with Jalen Carter, just with how the team has been playing. I mean, it really is, something to look forward to. And I mean, we look back at uh Bryce Young when he got benched about 3 weeks ago for Andy Dalton, or even longer than that, I think. I think it's almost been I think it's been almost a month now since he's been benched. But for him to come back and him to take over this Panthers team, win in London against the Giants, win against I believe the Falcons, but he's been getting the job done. He's kept a lot of close games. The close game last week against the Buccaneers, kept a close game against the Chiefs 2 weeks ago. Um, it really, I mean, it's just been a sight to see with how Bryce Young has improved his game and continued to make franchise quarterback uh identity for himself. I mean, we saw a couple weeks or a month ago that teams were looking to trade for him because they saw, potential in him. But now, he's starting with the Panthers again. He's starting to pick up speed. He's starting to develop a little bit better, but it's gonna be a tough game. And, with Quinion Mitchell, the rookie cornerback drafted for the Eagles in the first round, with him playing at a top cornerback spot, I mean, he's been playing spectacular. It's just a matter of what do the Panthers have in store against this Eagles team? Do I think the Panthers will upset the Eagles? No. I think, the Eagles have far too much talent to be destroyed by the Panthers. But I do think this game for the Panthers, I think it's more about what do they have in store? What can they work on for the future? How can their pride play off against a team like this that could potentially win the Super Bowl this year? And it's going to be one of those games where, Saquon might have a career game. He might rush for like another 200 yards. He might have a couple of touchdowns, whatever the case may be. But for the Panthers, this is going to be a true test to see what the future has in store for them. So I'm going to say the Eagles win this game, probably by a big score. But for Bryce Young and the Panthers, I think this is going to be a new beginning for their team.
Yeah, I do think that the Eagles are going to win this one. Obviously, the Panthers are not doing so hot this season. Bryce Young has picked things up, though. And, I don't know what the future is going to look like for the Panthers. I do think that, Bryce Young still has a long way to go to be a franchise quarterback. And, he's been on and off the bench, but, he's picking things up for the Panthers. When you look at the Eagles, I know a lot of people aren't going to like me saying this, but, I do think that the Eagles really they are a top team. They really could make it back to the Super Bowl. I don't know about winning it, but I do think that they could make it back on the NFC side. But, they will have to take down the Lions, and, that's going to be tough. But, imagine that. Eagles, Lions. That would be a good game. But when you look at the Eagles, you mentioned Saquon Barkley, possibly winning MVP this season. And I agree. I think he should. I know Josh Allen is doing really good this season, but, Saquon Barkley, he has just done an incredible job. And it's really cool to see, players win the MVP award when they are not a quarterback, just because so many quarterbacks always win. And, obviously last season we saw Christian McCaffrey win, and so it'd be kind of cool to see Saquon win as well. But I do think that the Eagles are going to win this one. The game will also be in Lincoln Financial Field, which is the Eagles Stadium. So, obviously the Eagle fans will be there and be showing up for their team. I really don't think the Panthers have a chance at this one, but, I guess I'll say it will be interesting just for the sake of it.
Yeah, I mean, chances are this game will probably be a blowout. Like I said, I think it's more of watching the development of the Panthers team with, how are they gonna progress going into the future? How are they gonna progress, building around Bryce Young with the talent that he's shown? Um, Eagles are up there as one of the best teams in the NFC, especially after beating Lamar Jackson, who Lamar Jackson never loses to the NFC teams. I think it's kind of funny though I think Saquon might be Lamar Jackson's kryptonite. You go back to a couple years ago when Saquon Barkley and the Giants beat the Ravens as the first time Lamar Jackson loses to an NFC team, and now you have Lamar Jackson against the Eagles team, and they beat him again. I mean, granted, Justin Tucker has been playing like the greatest kicker this year, and unfortunately, he actually is playing like one of the worst kickers in the NFL this year. I think, if he was on target, if he played his best football, I think the Ravens might have beat the Eagles, but for Saquon Barkley, I mean, he's just having himself a game. He will probably win Offensive Player of the Year. Um, like I said, there's a chance he might win MVP. We just don't know it yet. He's on pace to break the NFL record for rushing yards held by Eric Dickerson. So we don't know. I mean, anything's possible in the future. But moving on, another divisional rival game. In fact, another heavy rival game is the Cleveland Browns against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And we saw this game happen a couple weeks ago on Thursday Night Football. In fact, the first snow game in the NFL this year. And we saw the Browns upset the Steelers with, Jameis Winston, with Nick Chubb scoring 2 touchdowns against the Steelers. Will we see that happen again? I mean, these teams hate each other. And I mean hate each other. Browns fans hate Steeler fans hate Browns fans, players hate each other. I mean, this is about as fierce as a competition of a rivalry you can get. And for the Browns to go into the Steelers' country, it really will create a lot of, you know, redemptions and revenge, especially for the Browns beating them in Cleveland last time. Will we see, Jameis Winston play crazy against the Steelers team? There's a chance. I mean, we saw Jerry Jeudy go off last week against the Broncos and him put up 200 yards and a touchdown. We saw Nick Chubb catch his first receiving touchdown of the season. Jameis Winston put up almost 600 yards of offense alone. And that itself, or 500 yards of offensive alone. I mean, he put up almost 600 yards in total throwing yards if you include, the interceptions that he's thrown. But I mean, it really is spectacular just to see how much of a gunslinger Jameis Winston is. And I really was shocked that he did not get picked up by a team that needed a quarterback this offseason. And, you look at it with the Browns, Jameis Winston is playing like a pretty good quarterback on a pretty bad team. And for them to keep it close in a lot of these games, win a couple of games, it's spectacular to see. In fact, they've beaten the Ravens and the Steelers, who are both, heavy playoff favorites in this season. But for them to, keep it close, like I mentioned, I mean, Jameis Winston might be looking at a pretty hefty contract from a team that needs a quarterback this offseason. It could be any team in particular. I mean, we've seen him throw the ball. Granted, he does have a pretty big history of throwing interceptions, but I'd rather take a guy who can throw the ball and give me opportunities and, might throw a couple picks over a guy who doesn't give me a chance. And I think, for Jameis Winston, this is a new redemption in his career. The Steelers, I do think the Steelers will, beat the Browns this time around just because you never want to lose to a divisional rival twice, especially if you're the Steelers playing against the Browns. But you never know what could happen. Especially with how the Steelers defense has been playing. I don't think they want to lose to the Browns twice. So I'm going to give the win to the Steelers. It's probably going to be another close game like it always is against these two teams. But, Russell Wilson throwing almost 400 yards or almost 500 yards last week against the Bengals. Shootout game there. I think, it's going to be a fun game to watch with both these teams.
Yeah, I do think that this is going to be an interesting one. I think that, obviously the Browns, when they faced off against the Broncos, it was a very, defense heavy game. I think that that will be the case in this game as well. I think that, the Browns defense will have to show up, but also I think that the Steelers defense will obviously show up. The Steelers are a good team and they are not talked about that much. They have a 9-3 record, which is pretty amazing after seeing what they did last season. And then, obviously coming into the season, it was, who's going to be the quarterback for the Steelers? Is it going to be Russell Wilson or Justin Fields? And, obviously both of them have done really well on the Steelers. So it just goes to show, the system that is taking place in Chicago. But, this is going to be an interesting one. I'm going to go with the Steelers. I don't think that Jameis Winston will have that great of a game against the Steelers defense. And I think that, I don't think that this one will be that close. But I do think it will be an interesting one just because, it is a division matchup. And, when you see division matchups, it's always going to be a close game.
And you look at these two teams. I mean, with the history that they have behind each other, you have to think like there's a chance that like these two teams could potentially get into a fight with each other. And we've seen it before. I mean, we look back at the infamous helmet fight with Miles Garrett and Mason Rudolph that happened a few years ago. But I mean, it's always tense with these two teams, and for them to come into this game after a very upsetting loss to the Browns, maybe we could see some fuel light under the Steelers, especially since the Ravens lost last week. Now the Steelers are fighting for a potential division title spot, which you know adds on more fuel for the Steelers to win this game. But moving on, we have the Raiders against the Buccaneers, and the Raiders were just eliminated from playoffs last week with their loss to the Kansas City Chiefs after that upsetting fumble that happened in the fourth quarter in field goal range. Buccaneers uh, now slowly recovering from injuries, have been making their slow comeback into playoff redemption, with the Falcons, kind of choking away their lead at the division. Buccaneers are now a game behind the Falcons, and, obviously a tiebreaker holds the Falcons after the Falcons beat them twice this year, but anything could change. We've seen Kirk Cousins not play so great. We've seen Mike Evans and Baker Mayfield's connection connect. Speaking of Mike Evans, he needs about 500 yards to stay on his 1,000-yard seasons for his streak to continue to 10 years. Um, we saw him play last week against the Panthers. He put up 118 yards. So if he keeps that production up, we will see Mike Evans with his 10th season of 1,000 yards, which is absolutely incredible to see. Obviously, second behind Jerry Rice. But with that, I mean, there's not much looking forward to the Raiders. They're already out of playoffs. They're probably going to look for, a future higher draft pick, um, especially, with quarterback injured, a backup quarterback with Aiden O'Connell, not playing spectacular, but playing decent. Raiders are obviously pretty banged up too at the running back spot. Brock Bowers is the only shining spot, I should say, on the offensive side of the Raiders offense. Defensively, you still have Max Crosby and all of them, but Brock Bowers has definitely been getting it done. I would like to see Brock Bowers win Offensive Rookie of the Year with the numbers he's put up. I mean, as a rookie coming into the league, 900 yards of receiving yards, a couple of touchdowns add on to his name, um, top 10 receiver in the NFL with receiving yards, receptions, and touchdowns. I mean, that is spectacular to see for a rookie tight end. And I I would like to say that I saw him becoming a star tight end of the future before the draft. And I even told people in my fantasy league, I said, hey, if we don't pick up Brock Bowers before round 10, I'm going to pick him up. And no one picked him up because they just didn't want to take the chance on the Raiders offense. And now he is the number one tight end in fantasy football. But for him to do what he's done, especially on that Raiders offense, I think he rightfully deserves to be Offensive Rookie of the Year over Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels. Now, don't get me wrong, both those quarterbacks have been playing at a very great level. I just don't think what they've done can compare to what Brock Bowers has done. I mean, right now, he's currently on pace to break the NFL record for rookie tight ends and receptions. I think he's on pace to break another NFL record I can't think of at the top of my head, but he has been playing a spectacular first year of football. But again, I'm still going to give the ball the win to the Buccaneers. Do I think Brock Bowers and Mike Evans are set for another big game against each other? Absolutely. I think Mike Evans will put up another 100-yard game with a touchdown. I wouldn't be shocked if Bowers put up another 100-yard game with a couple of touchdowns to add to his name, and just to add on to his offensive rookie of the year resume. But like I said, I do think the Buccaneers are going to win this game.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with you on that. I do think the Buccaneers will find a way to win this game, especially since the game will be in Tampa Bay. And, Mike Evans, just an incredible player, a future Hall of Famer. And this morning I actually saw a video of him, and it was a great video. I saw him when, the Buccaneers faced off against the 49ers, and there was a little boy who was wearing 49ers gear from head to toe, and Mike Evans saw him and he gave him his gloves. So, it just goes to show you, like, really how he is as a person as well. Obviously he did not have to do that. This was inside of the tunnel, so I'm sure he didn't really expect anybody to see. And, there was a video of it. So that was really cool to see. Obviously, since the little kid was wearing gear from a different team, he did not have to do that. He probably would have never even done that if he didn't want to. So, just goes to show you what kind of person he is. He was actually nominated for Walter Payton Man of the Year. He's been nominated for the award 4 times. And, it would really be kind of cool to see him win it one time. But, when it comes to this game, I think it's going to be a great matchup. I do think the Bucks are going to win, as I mentioned. The Raiders just have not done good at all this season. They've come close to some good teams like the Chiefs, and they just can't find a way to get it done. And, you mentioned Brock Bowers. I remember before the season started, you said that he's going to be really good in the league. Obviously, he came from Georgia, so you cannot come from Georgia and not be a good player. And then you mentioned that you think that he could be the next Travis Kelce someday. So, I remember that statement clear and very specific when you mentioned it, and I think back on it as I'm watching Brock Bowers, put up some great numbers. So, I will defend you on that one. So, this is going to be a great game, though.
Yeah, and just like looking at Brock Bowers, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, he will be a top tight end in the league for the future. I mean, he has looked like the next Travis Kelce in the NFL. I mean, obviously not as big, a little more athletic, I would say. But yeah, Brock Bowers is definitely looking like he's going to be what Kyle Pitts should have became when he got drafted. I mean, Kyle Pitts has just looking like not been looking like the greatest tight end. I mean, we all thought, going into this year with Kirk Cousins as the quarterback, we think, oh, Pitts is going to get the ball more. He's going to, create separation, but he just hasn't been able to do that. And for him to, not have the games that he's hoping for, I think we see that with Brock Bowers in this game. So moving on, we have two lower end teams of the AFC South with the Jaguars and the Titans. Another divisional game, uh, another game that I don't think many people are going to be watching except their own fan base. This is going to be, yeah, game. Obviously, Mac Jones is going to be taking over the starting spot for the Jaguars with Trevor Lawrence having that concussion from Al Shahir. Titans, they're running with Will Levis, a couple of older players on their team. It's just, not a pretty game. With how the Jaguars have been playing, with, where the team's at currently, I would honestly hope the Jaguars lose this game. I know it would suck to lose to a divisional rival, but I honestly hope the Jaguars lose to this team. And I only say that because if they stay on pace to lose every single game of this season, they would have the number one draft in the NFL. They could trade that draft pick for more draft picks because they really don't need a true number one player in the draft, especially with Trevor Lawrence, having a new contract, you know, wide receivers, with Brian Thompson Jr. have been playing great. Secondary's been decent. Defense has been playing decent. I mean, I would trade out of that number one spot, gain some draft picks, and build from there. But I can see the Titans if it does play out the way that does, where both these teams play competitively. I could see the Titans win this game. I would hope the Titans win this game just for the Jaguars' sakes, but who knows? I mean, both these teams are a top five draft pick with Jaguars at 2-10 and the Titans at 3-9. It really is looking like one of those scenarios. But for what it's worth, it'll probably be a close game just because both these teams are, trying to stay alive with the top five pick in the draft. So I'm gonna give the win to the Titans with Will Levis at quarterback and move on from there.
Yeah, obviously Trevor Lawrence will not be playing in this game. I do think that the Titans are going to win. Obviously, they have Tony Pollard in their backfield, and the Titans are just the better team overall. Really there's not much of a difference. The Jags 2-10, the Titans 3-9. But this game will be played in Tennessee, and the Jags obviously with a backup quarterback, and they could not get really anything done with a starting quarterback. So, really just not a great team this season. I am going to go with the Titans and Will Levis. I do think that, over time he's seemed to pick things up, but that's just how both of these teams' seasons have gone. So, going to be interesting. I do think that this will be a close game. I don't think a lot of people will be watching. I think really the only people that will be watching these games are, you know, Florida and Tennessee. So I'll just put that out there. But moving on, we have probably our favorite game of the week, the Seattle Seahawks and Arizona Cardinals. I know that last time these teams played, obviously we want the Cardinals to win, being in Arizona. But, the Seahawks were able to take the win last game. I think that the Cardinals will be able to get this one done. It's going to be an interesting one. I think it will be a close one. But, the second time around, I hope that the Cardinals can get it done, especially after coming off of a loss last week to the Vikings, a tough one, 1 point difference. And then the Seahawks, obviously, they were able to defeat the Jets after, being behind by a big lead, and then they came back. So, it's going to be interesting. I do think that, the Cardinals offense will have to show up. Kyler Murray will have to put on a performance, and, their defense will have to play the way that they played when they played against Minnesota. The Seahawks, they're a hard team to stop. They're 7-5, the Cardinals 6-6. So it's going to be interesting. Obviously that NFC division is still up in the air when it comes to who will take the division. So it'd be pretty cool to see the Cardinals do it. But what are you thinking for this one, Tyler?
Yeah, you hit it right on the nail. I mean, this game is going to be a very, very big showing for what team might take the NFC West title for, this game in particular. Um, there's a lot at stake for either of these teams, especially both sitting with the Seahawks sitting at a 7-5 record, Cardinals sitting at 6-6 record. Um, it really is just a matter of what team is going to be hot going into this game. You kind of said it you kind of said it earlier. Seahawks played better in Seattle. I do think that the Cardinals coming off a bye week playing in Seattle against a pretty big Seahawks team was kind of a recipe for disaster. I kind of saw them losing to Seattle. I wasn't hoping that they would lose, but I expected it just because a lot of these teams they come out of the bye week, especially with the Cardinals, going on a 3-game win streak and then thinking, oh, we'll take a break, we'll come back and we'll play just as good, and for them to fall flat against a big division rival. I mean, it really is something that a lot of Cardinal fans didn't want to see, just because it let the Seahawks take control of the division. But this game should be different. Obviously, the Cardinals will be playing at home in Seattle or against Seattle in Arizona. Um, the fan base is what scares me the most. Every time we see this Seahawks team play in Arizona, it's always a home game for Seattle. The Seahawks fan base always takes over. I wouldn't be shocked if this weekend was the same situation. But the good thing is the Cardinals have played a couple of games. They're, more of a fire in their gut as Jonathan Gannon would say. I do think they're going to come out and play hard, especially with how much is on the line. There's situations that if the Cardinals do win, they're essentially almost guaranteed a playoff spot, barring the last two games of the season. Seahawks, on the other hand, same thing. They're guaranteed a playoff spot unless they lose the last couple of games of their season. It really shows that this game is probably going to determine who is going to the playoffs next week or going into the playoffs in the future. We look at the games for, the Cardinals. They play the Panthers, they play the Patriots, they play the 49ers, they play the Seahawks or the Rams for the next four games after the Seahawks. The Seahawks go out, they play the Packers, they play the Vikings, they play the Bears, and then they play the Rams in their final game. There is a lot on the line for this game. I know a lot of people are like, oh, the Seahawks play Packers, they play the Vikings, they play the Bears. I mean, those are some tough competition. I do think, the Seahawks could potentially pull off an upset against the Bears and the Rams again. But the Vikings, Packers, those are going to be some really close games. It really is that this game has a lot of importance for both these teams, and we've seen Ray McBride play really well. We've seen Marvin Harrison get a couple catches. We've seen Michael Wilson become more involved in the game. James Conner has been playing spectacular. Um, we saw just how much of a defensive game both these teams played when they last faced each other in Seattle. Obviously, Leonard Williams was the big part of Seattle, creating some big down and distances or keeping Arizona off the field. We saw DJ Metcalf, make some big plays. We saw, Jackson Smith and Jigba have a pretty big screen catch and run for 70 yards and then the touchdown to end off that drive. We saw Kyler Murray have the costly pick six before halftime. So there is a lot on the line for this game. I do think the Cardinals will bounce back against Seattle. Do I think it's going to be a very defensive game again? Absolutely. Obviously, the big player of the game last time these teams fought were Trey McBride and Jackson Smith and Jigba. I do think the Cardinals will put more focus on JSN in the slot with Miles or with Garrett Williams playing as well as he has. I do think, the Seahawks are going to look more at Trey McBride, especially with how I shouldn't say weak their linebacker core is, but with how inexperienced their linebacker core is, they're probably going to put more, DBs and safeties on McBride, especially underneath. So there's going to be a lot more opportunity for Harrison and Wilson. I do think this game was probably going to be like a 3-point game at most. I don't see this game going any further than 3 points, but I do have Arizona winning this game.
Yeah. And then moving on, the Buffalo Bills are going to be taking on the Los Angeles Rams. This will be an interesting one. This one's going to be in LA. So, obviously the Bills, they can escape from the snow globe that they played in when they faced off against the 49ers last week. But, this is going to be an interesting one because, the Rams are a decent team. They're 6-6. The Bills, obviously, they're in the top category. They're 10-2. And, I really don't know what to say about this one just because, I think that the Rams could get this one done. But, it's hard to go against the Bills, especially when Josh Allen is playing at the MVP level. And then, just the Bills defense doing great things. But then on the other side, you have Kyren Williams, you have Matthew Stafford, you have Puka Nacua, you have Cooper Kupp, just an amazing roster on the Rams side. But for this reason, for the reason of which team is going to win, I do think that I'm going to go with the Bills. It's hard to go against them, especially right now and in the position that they're in. They want to make it. They want to be a Super Bowl team. They want to win the Super Bowl. Josh Allen wants to win MVP. So, I think that the Bills have a lot more on the line, and I think that they're going to be playing really, really tough against the Rams.
Yeah, and you mentioned at the very end the Bills have more to play for. I have to disagree with that. Especially with the reemergence of Puka and Cooper for the Rams, there is a lot on the line for the Rams as well. I mean, we talked a couple weeks ago, the Rams probably weren't gonna make the playoffs with the injuries that they face, not playing at a competitive level. They're now sitting at 6-6 right now, just as competitive as the Cardinals and Seahawks are right now. I mean, there is the possibility that the Rams could potentially win the division as well if both the Cardinals and Seahawks lose a couple more games than expected, which is a very real possibility. And, especially for the Rams who play both those teams in week 17 and week 18, there is a lot to be on the line for them to make the playoffs and potentially win the NFC West division. Now, you bring up the Bills. Yeah, they are fighting for a number one seeded spot in the AFC, especially with that bye week. Um, and winning this game could put a lot more pressure on the Ravens and the Chiefs just because, or the Rams and the Chiefs, I should say, just because the Rams now are going to have to fight a lot harder against the team that they have for the upcoming schedule to make the playoffs. And, with the teams being, the 49ers who have been facing a lot of injuries, the New York Jets who, have been kind of a bust, and then the Cardinals and Seahawks, like I mentioned, who have been playing at a really good level at football. But then you look at the Bills and, you know, the Bills, they really don't have a much tougher schedule than that either. I mean, you face the Lions, which I mean that should be a very, very heavy watched game. And then you go on to face the Patriots, the Jets, and the Patriots again, which I mean, those are, like I said, not those great of a teams, but there's a lot on the line for this game for both these teams, especially, with the number one spot being on the line in the AFC and then, playoffs on the NFC side. But I do have the Bills winning. We've seen the Bills defense play great in and out. Do I think they have a tougher challenge this week with Puka and Cooper? Absolutely. I mean, Matthew Stafford has been quarterback playing day and night with Cooper and Puka. Especially with the Bills defense not being great against the run, we might see, more Kyron Williams and big yards from him. But it's gonna be a close game, especially with, how Jared Verse has been playing, with how Byron Young's been playing, that defensive line there. Bills defensively have been playing great secondary all around. So I do think the Bills are gonna win, but I don't think it's gonna be as much as people think.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting game, but, moving on, the Chicago Bears going to be taking on the 49ers. Obviously the 49ers are in a bad position after losing to the Buffalo Bills last week, and it was an embarrassing loss. They lost by a lot of points. It was, you know, I think some people thought that maybe coming into this game, the 49ers could be underdogs. And, that's just not how it went. The Bills outscored them 35-10, and then obviously Christian McCaffrey and Jordan Mason were injured during this game. So, it was a bad day for 49ers fans, a bad day for San Francisco. But then also on the other side, the Bears lost on Thanksgiving Day. They lost their coach, Matt Eberflus, who was fired after, poor clock management. So, this is going to be an interesting matchup. And I never thought I'd say this, especially in 2024, but I think that this is an even matchup. I think that, Caleb Williams has what it takes with DJ Moore and Cole Kmet, on the offensive side to, find a win over the 49ers with Brock Purdy and George Kittle and Debo Samuel, just because of, the poor decisions that the 49ers are making. And, it's not only about the decisions, it's about their performance. And, obviously the defense has not performed well. Now Brock Purdy's without Christian McCaffrey, Jordan Mason, and they're just in a bad position. So, I do think that Kyle Shanahan does have, the advantage here, obviously, with his past experience. I think that, the conversation has been going on. Is Kyle Shanahan on the hot seat? And we talked about this before we press record. And I don't think that he is. And, you know, just because of the fact that Brock Purdy was he was Mr. Irrelevant. And, I think that he did good in college, but, a lot of NFL teams doubted him. Kyle Shanahan did not. The 49ers did not. And, I think that Kyle Shanahan really has a lot to do and had a lot to do with how far Brock Purdy has come. And, I just don't see him being on the hot seat. I don't think the 49ers will get rid of him. I think that they'll give him one or at the most two more seasons to prove what he is capable of, and which is winning a Super Bowl. He's made it to a Super Bowl. The team fell apart. They did not win. And I think that really Kyle Shanahan is a good coach. But when it comes to the 49ers Bears, the 49ers I think are going to win this one. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with the 49ers. Really, this conversation could go on for, 20 minutes. But to keep it short, I think the 49ers are going to win. Kyle Shanahan will stay as the coach of the team. I think that there will be some adjustments made when it comes to defensive coordinator and, other positions around the organization. But, that's just my opinion on it.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point with, how the team has been playing with, all the injuries the 49ers have had. I I don't necessarily think Kyle Shanahan is on the hot seat either, and, we talked about this before we press record, like you said. Um, I think a big reason why this team has not looked at firing Kyle Shanahan is just because of the amount of success they've had over the last couple years under his head coaching career. I mean, you look back to a very similar situation this team has faced was right after they lost the Super Bowl against the Chiefs, prior to this most recent one, they go out, lose to the Chiefs, and then you come back and then you have, you know, Jimmy Garoppolo get hurt. You have, your starting running back get hurt with Mike Brenda. You have another starting running back getting hurt. And they just kept building all these injuries. This is basically the exact same thing the 49ers faced a few years ago. Do I think it's fair for them to cut Kyle Shanahan? No. Do I think Kyle Shanahan, has been not the greatest coach? Yeah. I mean, he's blown a couple of big games because of being too conservative or being too aggressive in some situations. We've seen so far this season that, the Niners blow 3 games in the 4th quarter against divisional rivals with the Rams, the Cardinals, and the Seahawks now. Um, but I think a lot of it's gonna be overlooked on the fact that there's all these injuries on the team. I mean, you have McCaffrey who's on IR for the 2nd time. You have Ayuk who's on IR. You have, the backup who is, maybe put on IR with Jordan Mason. Both of them actually getting hurt against the Bills last week. And McCaffrey, like everyone knows, got injured before the season with Achilles tendonitis in both his legs. So, it's just interesting to see how that whole thing works out. And then, Jordan Mason, who came back and was leading the team in rushing yards and actually was one of the top 5 running backs in the NFL in yards, gets injured with a high ankle sprain. And, he's looking to be placed on IR as well. But you can't really go and say, hey, this coach should be fired because they haven't had a winning record when you look at all the history of stuff. Do I think, the Niners are a great team. Yeah. Brock Purdy, I think, with everything going on, I think he's still been playing at a high level of football. I think the Niners have basically uh, not guaranteed, but they've basically put their word saying like we're gonna build off Purdy and see how he develops from there. Um, I really do think though, after this season, I think next season is like the final chance the Niners have at making the Super Bowl. I think their window is closing very quickly. I think it's closing uh very quickly with amount of money that's being spent on the team, especially, with this last off season with all the holdouts and stuff like that. I think, if this season next year fails, I think maybe there's some more conversation with Kyle Shanahan, but I don't think that's a possibility. The Bears, on the other hand, they just fired their head coach. They just fired their offensive coordinator. They're building off a rookie quarterback with, a strong wide receiver core, a strong offense, a very strong defense. it really could go either way for these teams. I think it just depends on injuries. There was reports that DJ Moore wasn't practicing this week with Roshan Johnson and a couple other Bears players. I know there's been talk that Nick Bosa might not play again with another hip injury, which would be a huge blow for the 49ers defense. But it's really going to come down to which team has less important injuries for this team. I think, if the 49ers lose this week, I mean, that's basically a write off the playoffs for them. Bears, if they lose this week, they're guaranteed out of the playoffs. I mean, granted, with their division, it's probably guaranteed anyways. But I would like to see the Bears play to their highest potential now that, Eberflus is gone, now that Waldron's gone. We've seen production from Caleb Williams. We've seen production from DJ Moore. We've seen production from Keenan Allen. Um, there hasn't been a lot of production with Rome Odunze, who I think, a lot of people expected to get a lot of targets and potential like big game catches and stuff like that. But we just haven't seen it so far with him. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a game to look forward to. Their big game, with the Bears is their passing game, so they might run a lot with the 49ers, especially now that Isaac Guerendo is now the starting running back, the 6th round rookie this year, will get his first official start for the 49ers against, a pretty bad run defensive Bears team. We've seen the 49ers throw the ball and, it's been successful here and there, but their forte is definitely their run game. So we'll see how either of these teams play out. I do think the Niners will win this game, especially if they have their big defensive players come out, but we'll see what happens. But I have the Niners winning by, 3 to 7 points.
Yeah. And, it's interesting now that Christian McCaffrey will be out just because, and you talked a little bit about this, but, obviously after his, stellar performance last season and then just missing, you know, pretty much he has missed all of the season. I know he was back for a few games, but now he will be out. So just a sad situation for the 49ers and Christian McCaffrey. But, he posted on social media that, everything works in a mysterious way and he will be back stronger and better than ever. So just, you wish him well. But moving on, the Los Angeles Chargers taking on the Kansas City Chiefs. This is going to be a close one. What are your thoughts on this one?
I I really do think the Chargers can upset the Chiefs. And we saw last time, I think it was week 3 or week 4, where these 2 teams faced off each other and, the Chiefs won 17-10 against, the Chargers team who came off some pretty big injuries, especially with their 2 tackles. I do think the Chiefs are gonna be playing or the Chargers gonna play a lot better. I think one of the big things that is gonna hurt the Chargers this week is the absence of J.K. Dobbins, who just recently went on IR. Obviously, we saw him get injured last game against the Ravens, and I really do feel like the Ravens just have a curse on J.K. Dobbins. I mean, we've seen him play with the Ravens for 4 years, get injured in major ways all 4 years. You go out and you play the Ravens for the first time since being released from the team, healthy all year, and then get injured before halftime. So I think that's going to be one of the big key forms for the Chiefs if they play this team is stopping the passing game and forcing them to run the ball. Obviously, Gus Edwards is another good running back. Obviously, he's not as great as J.K. Dobbins is, but he still might be able to get production done. I just can't see the Chiefs, winning this game, or I can't see um, how this game is going to progress going into the season or the end of the season. Chargers currently have, a playoff spot in the wild card. That could change after this game if they win or lose. Um, like I said, the Chiefs haven't been playing spectacular. I mean, they almost lost to the Raiders last week, but I do think the Chargers will upset the Chiefs this week, and I'm gonna stick with that just because we've seen these divisional matchups, and we've seen how close a lot of these Chiefs games have been so far. It's bound to happen against another divisional rival, and I do think the Chiefs or the Chargers are the next team to upset the Chiefs. So I have the Chargers winning this game, but not by a large margin, but I do have them winning this game.
Yeah, I am gonna agree with you. I think it really is just a matter of time until the Chiefs, lose. They have lost a game in this season, but I do think that the Chargers are a good team. I think, Jim Harbaugh really just came in and, like he has put his resume on display in Los Angeles. He is a great coach. He has, led the Chargers to a great season. Obviously, right now, 8-4, and the Chiefs, they're a great team. Everybody knows that. That does not have to be said. Andy Reid is a great coach. That does not have to be said. Mahomes, obviously, but I think that the Chargers will be able to do it this week, especially on Sunday Night Football. I think it's going to be a close game. I would not be surprised. Maybe, possibly, this game could go to overtime, but I do think that the Chargers will be able to get it done. I think that just really out of nowhere, they they've been putting on a performance. But I will give credit to Jim Harbaugh because I think that he does have a lot to do with it.
Yeah, and for him to come into this league and create the impact that he has for a struggling Chargers team over the last couple of years, it's really been important for him to establish a strong running game. And we've seen that with this time at Michigan, where, he develops a strong run game. And for him to go into this last draft and draft Joe Alt with the fifth pick in the draft, I mean, it really was something to see with this Chargers team and how much, the offensive line means to, you know, uh, Jim Harbaugh with protecting the quarterback, with running the ball efficiently. I mean, he's definitely building something special. And for his return, I mean, you see Justin Herbert playing best football of his career so far. Obviously sitting at an 8-4 record. So there's a lot of conversation to be had, whether, you know, what to do with the future and, with the emergence of Lad McConkey, who I would say is now the number one receiver of the Chargers. I mean, he's been playing great. We all kind of knew, going into the draft that Lad McConkey was going to be an underrated aspect for wide receiver, especially on a Chargers defense that didn't have many great receivers. We see, Quentin Johnson, um, going out there making some big plays, making some great catches, and especially against a team like the Chiefs or the Chiefs, where their secondary is not necessarily the greatest, but their D line is what holds the team together. It's really just spectacular to see what Jim Harbaugh has been able to do with the Chargers and that whole offensive line. Now moving on to the Monday night game against the Bengals and the Cowboys. This, I mean, it's gonna be a watch game just because it's the Cowboys and Bengals. I mean, you're looking at a team that has no defense against a team that has no offense. And borderline no defense, depending on how you look at it. The Cowboys, lost Dak Prescott for the season. CeeDee Lamb's pretty banged up. Defensively, Trayvon Diggs has been on and off the field. They just got Ron Bland back. It's really interesting to see what the Cowboys have been doing.
What's up?
Obviously, Jerry Jones has been looking at it like, hey, we're still in the playoffs. We can get something going. And realistically, I mean, they have a small chance sitting at a 5-7 record after having a couple of key victories, especially the one against the Commanders a couple weeks ago. But I think at this point in the season, it's too late to push for a playoff spot. The Bengals right now, they're currently facing elimination with the playoffs. I don't think they have a chance at the playoffs either with how the Bengals defense has been playing. But for Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Trey Hendrickson, I think all those players are going to have some pretty big games against this Cowboys team. Another big thing that happened with the Cowboys just recently is Zach Martin is now going to have season-ending season-ending ankle surgery for the third time in his career, and it's possibly a final season for him as we look at the seven-time first-team All-Pro guard and potentially future Hall of Fame guard for the Cowboys. Going back in June, he had the conversation about retirement going into training camp. saying that it's definitely a possibility for him to retire after the season. And for him, having his third ankle surgery, uh, I wouldn't say being injury prone, but definitely having injury riddled end of his career is definitely looking like a possibility that the Cowboys may have to look for another franchise right guard, especially if Zach Martin does retire and has played his last down for the Cowboys. Um, I think Zach Martin, with the way he's been playing for the Cowboys over the last decade, has been nothing short of amazing. We've seen him, play in and out. We've seen him play through injuries, have more, you know, pancakes than holding penalties or whatever the case may be. It really has been a spectacular sight to see for Zach Martin, and for him to go out the way it has. It's been absolutely sad to see, what's happened with this team, but I do think, the Bengals are going to win this game and knock the Cowboys out of the playoffs. I just can't see, the Cowboys really being able to stop the Bengals for what it's worth. Their offense is too high power. Their defense kind of sucks, but I think their defense will be able to stop very slow Cowboys offense. So I'm gonna give it to the Bengals here.
Yeah, I do think that the Bengals are going to win just because, they have Joe Burrow, they have, Jamar Chase, who's been, doing incredible. They have Chase Brown, who's just been tearing up the field. You know, the Bengals are a good team, but they have fallen on some, hard times right now, 4-8. And, I think that this this matchup, I think, would be more interesting if Dak Prescott was involved. I do think that, Cooper Rush is a good quarterback. Obviously, before when Dak Prescott got injured, Cooper Rush did a great job filling in, and, it's his turn to fill in again. Um, but, it's going to be an interesting game. I think that the Bengals will just find a way to win. This is Monday Night Football, so going to be interesting. A lot of eyes will be on these teams. I wouldn't be surprised if it was a close game, but it'll be interesting. And you mentioned Zach Martin, and his injury that he suffered. What an unfortunate time for Zach Martin and the Cowboys. You just hope that he recovers very fast. But, moving on from the NFL, Arizona State will be facing off against Iowa State in the Big 12 championship. This has been a crazy time for Arizona State fans, as this has not happened in a long, long time. Obviously, Arizona State has just played incredible this season, and now they will have a shot at, making it to the college football playoffs. But first, they need to take down Iowa State, which will take place this weekend on Saturday. And, it's going to be a great game. Heading into this game, Kenny Dillingham was just named as, coach of the year. And then ASU has been ranked as the 15th team in the nation. When it comes to Iowa State, they're 16th. So a close, ranking. Cam Scatterboo has propelled Arizona State to the sixth best run game in the Power Four, which Iowa State's run defense is in the second worst in Power Four. Arizona will be without Jordan Tyson during the championship game due to an injury that he suffered when the team faced off against the University of Arizona. And Arizona State's defense has snagged 11 interceptions within its last 7 games. So I do think that their defense will play a huge role in this game. I think the game will be close. I know a lot of times, college football scores get, a little crazy. There's one team that's very high and one team that's very low. So, I think that this game will be close. I think, for Arizona State fans, it might be a little bit scary since Iowa State is projected to win by just a little bit. But, in my opinion, I do think Arizona State will be able to get this done, especially with Cam Scatterboo, Kenny Dillingham, and, just the overall environment. And they are just so excited to be in the position that they're in. But Tyler, what are you thinking as, these two teams head to Arlington to face off in the Big 12 championship?
This is gonna be a really good game, and I think for ASU fans, I think this is a very, very big thing that they've been waiting for. Obviously, Kenny Dillingham playing and coaching this team to such high expectations where they just shattered everything out of the water, I think has been absolutely, spectacular. Obviously, with the emergence of Sam Scadaboo, who transferred to ASU this last offseason, and him, having a Heisman level career with ASU this year, it has been spectacular to see, and for him and, the whole team that revolves around him, it's been nothing short, of a magical season for ASU, and for them to leave the Pac-12, join I would say, tougher competition in the Big Ten, and for them, projected to go last in the Big 12 to now the first team in the Big 12 as their first year in that conference. It's absolutely amazing to see, and, after ASU fans had to go through, the Herm Edward phase and how disastrous that turned out and just how many ASU players wanted to leave that organization, one of which being, Jayden Daniels, who left for LSU and became the Heisman winner there. I mean, there's a lot of things that I look forward to a promising year for, ASU and Kenny Dillingham, and especially, with U of A losing their head coach to Washington, and now they're in this whole kind of rebuilding phase with injuries and all that. I mean, ASU is looking in a very good spot, especially with all the transfers and NFL, draftees that are going from, Colorado and BYU and all those big teams. I think ASU has a very bright future ahead, and I do think that they're gonna upset Iowa State this week and go into the college football playoffs against whoever they are projected to face. I think right now they're projected to face Notre Dame, but it'll be a magical sight for ASU fans to see, especially for the first time in a long time. I actually think back to I want to say a couple years ago, like the first year of Herm Edwards' regime. But it's definitely something amazing to see how ASU has progressed through the last couple of years with how things have been progressing. And you look at like I said, Cam Scadaboo, who's been playing at a high level, and just how he's been playing. I mean, he's going to be one of the top look running backs in the NFL for the draft in the future. And it's been amazing. He kind of reminds me of James Conner in a way where, he can catch the ball, he can break tackles, he can make some big gains, and wherever the case he may be, it really is just amazing what ASU has transformed and how they've been able to progress with the success that they faced this season.
Yeah, and then, today we learned about some sad news. Um, Adrian Wojnarowski, recent cancer diagnosis. So, you know, just thinking of him and, just hoping for the best, very sad for, for the basketball world, for sports fans, for really everybody. You never want to hear about news like that, but Adrian Wojnarowski, he has done a fantastic job at covering the NBA throughout the years. Recently he retired, so he put his notebook away and called it a career, but I'm sure that whatever he does next, he will be just as good and if not better at it, as he is a very intelligent and experienced person when it comes to NBA sports, everything, really everything that involves sports. But Tyler, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it really is sad to see, the Waj become and uh announce that he has, this prostate cancer diagnosis. And, a lot of people really admire him. They really respect him as a reporter. And, whether you're a fan of basketball, whether you tune in or not, I mean, everyone knows who Adrian Wojnarowski is, and they just recognize the name. They recognize, how he breaks the news, and it's really something that he has passion for. And a lot of people, like you said, when he retired were, very, I shouldn't say upset, but they're very sad to see him, hang up the clipboard and the notes and everything and, retire on his own terms just because they all loved him. I mean, he is one of the few reporters that I can say that everyone from all fan bases can admire and respect just because of how much passion and dedication he has for that particular sport. And, it became such a big thing for him and how many players and fans adored him that they actually invented this phrase for him called the Waj bomb. And whenever there's an NBA thing, like a big news that gets broken or whatever, and you see it's from him, everyone goes, "Oh, the Waj bomb's been dropped. The Waj bomb's been dropped." And you're not gonna be able to see that much longer, with, obviously with him retiring, but obviously now with the cancer diagnostic. And it's unfortunate just to see him, be able to have to announce this diagnosis because I think a lot of people were kind of, hoping that he would just enjoy time with his family, which he is. I mean, he definitely, is doing it on his own terms. He's not wanting to fight through and do whatever he's passionate for, but I'm glad, he's being able to take time to spend with family, be able to enjoy the things around him and not focus, on his job anymore. He's had a very successful career. He's a loved man by everyone, and I really do mean everyone. I mean, you will not find one person that hates uh Wojnarowski, and you see just how much of an impact he has on the basketball world and even like the media world in general. Everyone loves him.
Yeah, he really is the Adam Schefter to the NFL. That is who he is to the NBA. And, obviously it is sad that he is no longer reporting, but, it's a good thing that he's able to spend some time with his family and, just focus on what he needs to focus on right now, which is getting better. So it is going to be interesting, to see who tries to fill his spot. Nobody will ever be able to, you know, really take over for him since he was just so amazing at what he did and what he does. But, that will do it for, this week's episode of Talking X's and O's with Alex and Tyler. Be sure to stay tuned in with us. I know things have gotten a little bit crazy lately with finals and Thanksgiving and, just the Cardinals bye week. And we have been, kind of slacking a little bit, but we promise to keep it up. So stay with us. But this has been it for this week's. It's going to be an interesting week for the NFL, for college football, for everything really in the sports world. So stay tuned into that, and we will be back next week to talk more about what happened and our projections for week 14. So stay tuned in. Thanks for listening, and have a great week.